So good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. We're going to be talking about the intakes we have coming up over the winter and spring. So that's going to focus on ESS, EOC, and public notification evacuation route planning. So who do we have with us today? I'm Danita Welch. I'm the manager for local government program services here at UBCM, and that's all of our provincially funded programs. We are fortunate to be joined by two of our program officers here from UBCM. So both Sasha and Lindsay are program officers that work on files related to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. And we also have Brittany Irving here from the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, who's also going to help us out with some of the Q&A. When we get to that part of the presentation. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that all of our panelists here today are fortunate to be joining from the traditional territories of the Algonquin speaking people, represented today by the the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, as well as the Wasanich peoples. And I'd like to offer personally that with my gratitude that I'm able to both work, live, and raise my family in this really outstanding territory. So looking at the agenda for today, as if you've joined our other webinars, you know we do like to keep the presentation as short as possible to maximize time for Q&A. So a little bit of housekeeping. We'll look at the program overview. As I said, we're going to look at what's technically the winter and spring intakes coming up next calendar year. There's a few program updates to be sharing at the same time. Spend some really brief time on some other funding, and then, like I said, try to leave as much time as we need for questions. So housekeeping, a few points. As you know, this webinar is being recorded. We will make the recording and the slide deck available after. We typically post the slide deck, the webinar presentation to our UBCM YouTube channel, and then the slide deck will be on our website. Links to both, I believe, we'll send out to everybody afterwards. We would ask if you have a question that you use the Q&A function. As much as possible, short and sweet, clear and concise are very much appreciated. If you have a question that's very much specific to your community, it's probably best to email us, cepf@ubcm.ca. Otherwise, we're happy to try to answer the question, but certainly it's usually of most benefit if the questions are focused on issues, ideas that other applicants may also be experiencing. What else do we have here? So the chat is disabled, so you won't be able to enter anything into the chat. If for whatever reason you're unable to use the Q&A to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll be able to identify who you are, and our admin staff today will be able to unmute you, so you'll be able to ask your question verbally. You can also just pop a note in the Q&A if that works for you that says, I would like to ask something in the Q&A, and we can also try to acknowledge you that way. So program overview, I'm going to hand the slide deck over to Lindsay, and she's going to walk us through some of the program content.
Perfect. So we will start with the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, which was launched in 2017. Now, the intent of the suite of this funding is to enhance the resilience of First Nations, local governments, and communities in responding to emergencies and to reduce risk from future disasters due to natural hazard and climate-related risks. And so we administer this program for the province, and all First Nations, that includes Band, Treaty First Nations, and Indigenous national governments with authorities for lands and resources, as well as local governments, that includes municipalities and regional districts, are eligible to apply. And so this next slide, you'll see that there is a list of the streams that fall underneath the, CEPF, that's our acronym for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. You can see that 3 out of the 6 streams are closed. So the emergency support services, emergency operations centers, and the public notification and evacuation route planning streams are open for applications. And then we will launch into those programs that are open for application. So I will hand it. Oh, I'm still going here. So I will, you can see here that emergency, all the deadlines are just here on the slide. So you've got, first up is going to be emergency support services. That's January 31st. And then we've got EOC February 28th and public notification and evacuation route planning April 25th. The exciting thing is that the grant maximum has increased from last year to this year. So last year it was $30,000 and this year it has increased to $40,000. And then I will hand it over to Sasha to take us through emergency support services.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. So, I mean, as Lindsay just mentioned, the deadline for this one is the first in line. It's oops, there we go, is January 31st. So still quite a bit of time with which to submit your application. The intent of this funding stream, of course, is to support eligible applicants to provide ESS services through volunteer and responder recruitment, retention and training, as well as the purchase of ESS equipment. All of the eligible costs and activities are shown in program and table 1 of the program guide. So supplies and equipment, training, exercises, and these supplies and equipment are looking at reception center and group lodging equipment, supplies for ESS responders, equipment for ESS modernization, like computer equipment, mobile devices. And then we're also looking at training for ESS responders to increase that capacity. So either mock reception center training or group lodging activations, tabletops. The one thing we will note is that reception centers or group lodgings must be either First Nations or publicly owned buildings or in an asset owned by the primary applicant or sub-applicant. And on that note, of course, regional projects are welcomed. And so if you have any questions about how that would work or the types of partnerships you can engage in or apply for, the eligible applicants still have to meet the eligibility requirements, and we'd be happy to chat through that with you if you have any other questions about that. Next up, of course, in our timeline is EOC, so I'm going to let Lindsay continue on with that one.
All right, so emergency operations centers. The intent of this funding stream is to support the purchase of equipment and supplies required to maintain or improve emergency operations centers, aka EOCs, and to enhance EOC capacity through training and exercise. And so very similar to the ESS funding stream, all of those eligible activities and training are listed in table 1. And so, the purchase of an installation of supplies and equipment within EOCs are eligible, and also eligible this year is the purchase and installation of off-site equipment that will support communication and external data collection that would be specific to the function of the EOC. So as Sasha mentioned, the EOCs must be located in a First Nation owned building or publicly owned building or an asset owned by the primary applicant or sub-applicant. Then we've got training and exercises. So training and the exercises are for EOC staff, and this would be exercises that support increasing EOC capacity. That could be a tabletop exercise that walks through EOC roles and responsibilities, a mock earthquake, fire, flood emergency to practice activating the EOC and directing emergency response. And as noted there in that last bullet, as of October 24th, the purchase and installation of tsunami sirens are eligible under, again, that owned and operated by primary or sub-applicant. And so I'm going to hand it back to Sasha, and she's going to take us through our next slide.
For tag teaming here. So third up on our list, last for our spring intake, is the public notification and evacuation route planning. This one's a little different than the previous two that were focused on equipment and training. This one is specifically for planning. So it's, eligible activities must result in the completion of a new or updated evacuation route plan or a new or updated public notification plan. This really helps align with the intent of the program, that It's to provide information for First Nations, local governments, and community members in the event of an emergency. In the program guide, there are sort of two sections that are really key to look at. The section 6 of the program guide does show the eligible activities and costs, and then the table 1 shows recommended content for those plans. For the eligible activities, you're looking at obviously the development of the new or updated plans, preparation of maps, spatial data, all those maps that would be used in these types of plans, as well as any amendments to relevant local plans, bylaws, or policies that are specific to these evacuation route or public notification planning. For the recommended content, you're looking at the identification and capacity of available routes, modes of transport, also looking at strategies or plans or policies for public notification and emergency alerting. For both of those types of plans, under that recommended content, it is important to note that these plans must be in alignment with provincial standards, and both of those are linked within that table in the guide. Another important thing to note for this funding stream is that the overall development or routine update of a local emergency plan, a standalone emergency plan, is not eligible, but we can certainly fund incremental updates to emergency plans to include newer updated evacuation route or public notification plans. So if you have any questions about that, we're always willing to chat through something for you and discuss any ideas that you may have about eligible activities or costs. And we have lots of time. The deadline isn't until the end of April for this one. So I think we're heading back. Oh, no, it's still me now. So looking at some program updates for the upcoming year, these were added just recently, but we just wanted to point out that Indigenous governing bodies and emergency management organizations, which have been enacted by a regional district bylaw, may act as the primary applicant on behalf of eligible applicants. So this is a little bit of a departure from previous eligible applicants, but we're happy to walk you through it if you may think you qualify under these. These emergency management organizations and Indigenous governing bodies will maybe the recipient of the funding, but the application still needs to be submitted by the eligible applicant. These Indigenous governing bodies must have authority for emergency management from the eligible First Nation members, and the EMOs must be created by the Regional District Servicing Establishing Bylaw, and they must be approved by the province of BC. You also must contact us in advance of submitting an application, just so that we can ensure that you're on the right track and that it is an eligible recipient. So please don't hesitate to reach out as that is a little bit new from previous years. And then looking at resolutions and letters of support for applications, this is a change that started this past summer in July. We have made it slightly different from previous years. So First Nations and local government applicants may submit a Band Council, Treaty First Nation, or local government resolution as in previous years, or you can submit a letter of support from either the band manager, your CFO, your CFO, for applications from a single applicant. And you have to be requesting less than $50,000 in funding. If you are looking to do a regional project with more than one applicant, you still will need to submit a resolution. And that is just because of the larger funding amount. And we want to make sure that all that support is there from everybody involved. And then moving ahead, we do have our online application process now. And so it is a two-step process. You submit the online application tool, which is available through our website. You go under the funding stream that you're interested in, and there's a link to submit this application tool. And once you've submitted that, you will get an email sent to the email address noted on the online submission that will give you the application worksheet to submit. All of these worksheets and supporting documents do also need to be submitted by the application, but you can submit the application tool well in advance of the deadline if you wish. The appendix in each program guide also gives you an overview of the application steps as well as the application questions. So you can prepare in advance. You don't have to do it all at once. And you can always, like I've said, and every time I think we're getting across that we're always open to calls and questions. We're happy to help. For the adjudication process, we do expect these intakes to be competitive, and applicants will be advised of the status of their application within 90 days of the application deadline. And now we're heading back to Lindsay to talk about some other funding.
Thank you, Sasha. All right, so other funding. So this next slide, it's just a really brief slide to let applicants know that our Canada Community Building Fund does have resiliency funding available for infrastructure and capacity building projects. Now, our CCBF team, again, love the acronyms, encourage First Nation improvement districts and electoral areas to first reach out to your regional district staff or EA directors before reaching out to the UBCM staff. Although we have included Toby Simpson's email address there. Once you have reached out again to kind of that first step, then you can follow up with Toby. All right. Next, we have our 2025 Fire Smart community funding and supports. And the intent of this program is to support communities to increase resiliency by undertaking community-based fire smart planning and activities that reduces a community's risk from wildfire. And so very similar to our CPF funding stream, all First Nations and local governments are eligible from BC are eligible to apply. Again, those caveats of Treaty First Nation, Indigenous national governments, municipalities and regional districts, as well as the EMOs and the IGBs that Sasha mentioned as well. And I'm not going to go into that because she did a great job of kind of running us through that. But the program, this year's program, as well as the 2024 program, operate on an application-based as well as an allocation-based program. And so those communities that have the foundational elements in place, that would be a fire smart position, a resiliency committee, as well as an up-to-date CWRP, which is a Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan in place, are eligible to apply for Fire Smart activities under that allocation-based program. They will have to go through the application-based program for fuel management as well as CWRP updates or development. And for those applicants who don't have those foundational elements in place, they can apply through the application-based program. The activities that are eligible for will be limited until those foundational elements are completed. So again, the Fire Smart position, Fire Smart education, attending the Wildfire Summit, creating that committee, creating that CWRP, and new for 2025 is the completion of Fire Smart assessments in areas of higher wildfire risk, which is exciting because that was not eligible in the 2024 program. And then the funding amounts have increased slightly for those communities of lower wildfire risk. So that risk class 4 to 5, they're now eligible. It was $100,000 last year. It's $150,000 this year. For those of higher risk, it's still $200,000 per year. And then we do have additional funding available for those applicants that are directly impacted by the 2024 wildfires. And so communities that have experienced as a direct result of 2024 wildfires, that would be loss of residential structure, loss of critical infrastructure, and then new for 2025, evacuation alerts and or orders on the recommendation of the BC Wildfire Service. And then additional funding is eligible for fuel management activities as well as Crown land transfer to Indigenous communities. So that's it's a big program. It's a meaty program. And certainly I've put the little bubble there for you to find out more at our website. And then as Sasha has mentioned many times, we are 100% available for any questions. And so you can feel free to reach out to myself or Jonas if you have any questions, or send an email to the CRI email address. All right, and then our next program is the Community to Community program. And so the intent of this program is to support the advancement of First Nation and local government reconciliation and relationship building through forums and agreements. And so you might be thinking, what does this have to do with emergency management? But this has to do everything with emergency management. This is your fund. This is your opportunity to develop those relationships. You can kind of see in that third bullet there, to develop or improve coordinated approaches to climate change, emergency preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. And that's what we're doing. That's what we want to do, is we really want to sit down and discuss these things with local government and First Nations. And so, Table 1, very similar to all of our program, kind of lists all of the eligible activities. And some of them are, again, that emergency management piece for planned or coordinated risk mitigation, emergency response, as well as you could do joint training or a tabletop exercise, community delivery and planning, economic development. So much. There's really, sky's the limit there. And so you have $10,000 as the maximum for these forums or events. And then we have an additional $10,000 available for agreements, the development of agreements, which could be protocols, MOUs, service agreements, joint plans or strategies, the joint review of bylaws or policies. And so it's a great fund. I know the deadline is fast approaching, and I'm certainly available for any questions if you want to put together an application for that. So that is as a regional community. I think that's all the other funding programs that we were going to share with you guys. So I'm going to hand it back to Danita.
Thanks to both Lindsay and Sasha for covering off the specific programs. So I don't need to repeat. We'd love to have you contact us for any questions. This is how you do it. As well, any questions that are more for the ministry, there's the disaster mitigation email address for EMCR as well. Brittany and other folks at EMCR would be happy to answer any questions that are more at the legislative policy, etc. kind of level, outside of program design. So we are ready for Q&A. Oops. Sorry about that. But before we move on, I'm going to steal a bit of Lindsay's thunder. So if any of you have been at or currently are at the Building Resilient Communities Conference, Lindsay spoke earlier this week, had a bit of a tips and tricks presentation, as well as some of the content you have already seen today. So I thought it was worth just sort of echoing some of the things she said. So one of the more on the sort of the tips and tricks. So the main one I wanted to kind of put out there is we've run over the application deadlines sort of coming up in January, February, and April for these 3 funding streams. If you find yourself in a position that you want to submit an application, but you can't meet that deadline, we can almost always approve a 2-week extension to an application deadline. You just need to contact us. We need to see it. Generally, we like to see it in writing. It comes in by email, but you can also just give us a call. In a perfect world, we'd ask you to do step 1, which is the online application portion, but then the worksheet you could have a bit more time to work on. So we are able to be fairly flexible in that regard. Some of the other pieces, and Lindsay, maybe, if you've probably got this fresher in your mind, if you want to jump in with some of the stuff you recently shared. On the other side, I was going to say we can be fairly flexible with extensions to project end dates, if that's helpful. When you are looking at applications, if you are going to be submitting a band council or a council of board resolution, those can follow after the application deadline. They don't have to come in at the same time. We generally would like to see them come in, reasonably close to the deadline. But if you're not able to have it at the same time as or in advance of the application deadline, we always just encourage folks to maybe include in your email cover letter when you expect the resolution to be available. Then we can just sort of note that so it would be added to your file. Lindsay, do you have any more highlights you want to share before I see we do have 5 questions? I will move to those after.
Yeah, I think that, Sasha mentioned that all of the online application questions, as well as your application worksheet questions, are in the appendices of all the program guides. So this is kind of your prelim. So we want you to be able to be as prepared as possible. So making sure to visit those program guides and kind of scroll down to the bottom. And I know that, some of the program guides can be long and you don't have a lot of time. And that's where, Sasha and I both mentioned table one as being really the area that includes all of those eligible activities that you can apply for within those funding streams, but not forgetting right underneath table one is those ineligible costs and activities. And so just making sure to kind of run your eyes through those as well, because that will tell you what's ineligible, so you can avoid putting that into your application. And then the one thing that we didn't mention is that we do have the LGPS budgetary tool. And so this is on our website, and it's just an Excel spreadsheet. But what's really great about it is it does have 3 tabs. One is for budget, the next is for amendment, and the next is for financial summary. And so this can be really helpful in laying out kind of throughout the project's lifespan. Is if you need to make any changes, you've got your budget in the first tab, so you can refer to it if you want to, put in some changes for review to UBCM. And then with final reporting, being able to reference that budget and include those approved activities right in your financial summary is going to save you a lot of time. So these are all tools that are available for you.
And we're certainly finding folks are using that Excel spreadsheet a lot. It's coming in probably with the majority of our applications now, which is fantastic. So I'm going to jump us over to the Q&A. First couple questions are more just sort of administrative process. Claudia has posted in the chat the answers to both of these, but just as a reminder, we will make both the slide deck and the recording of this presentation available afterwards. We will send out an email to everyone that registered so you can find the links and you can share them within your agencies. And if you do have any questions, you can see the contact information is on the screen now, but the general email is cepf@ubcm.ca. So anything related to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund can go directly to that email address. Okay, so now we've got some sort of meatier questions. So we'll dig in and we'll have our panelists help me out as much as possible here. So the first question is, if a regional district submits on behalf of 2 service areas. Oh, well, I'm going to pause there and say that regional districts under these 3 funding streams we're looking at, ESS, EOC, and public notification evacuation route planning, don't have the ability to submit on behalf of service areas. So our fire department funding was a little bit different. ESS, EOC, and public notification evacuation route planning are not. So it is one grant of $40,000. It's not sort of by electoral area or service area. The balance of the question was around whether it would be a letter or a resolution. If the request is under $50,000, it's sort of up to you. Some local governments have fairly firm protocols that they take grant applications to council and they get resolutions. Some are more comfortable with letters coming in. I'd say since we made that change in July, looking at some of the intakes we had over the fall so far, lots of communities are taking advantage of submitting a letter for the grants that are of a lower value. So if you, for the person who put this in, if you do have any further questions about how regional districts can apply, certainly do either give us a call or send us an email just to make sure that we do have that characterized correctly. Okay. Next question is around Indigenous governing bodies. Can you re-explain how non-First Nation Indigenous governing bodies can apply for these programs? Seems like there are extra barriers for Métis and Inuit communities who are disproportionately affected by climate health emergencies. A really good question. So the current design for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund allows sort of three categories of First Nations to apply to the program. So bands, as enacted under federal legislation, Treaty First Nations, and Indigenous excuse me, Indigenous organizations, national governments that have authority for lands and resources. Um, Under the, and maybe Sasha, could you back up to the slide that speaks to Indigenous governing bodies? This is a very minimal amount of information.
Hang on.
We didn't want
Sorry.
to,
Sorry.
that's all right.
Sorry. Thought I had it. There we go.
There we go. So we didn't want to overwhelm folks with too much information on the slide deck. But so I'm just turning my head because I have a program guide open to the side. So the specific language that's in our program guides for CEPF is an Indigenous governing body with authority for emergency management may act as the primary applicant on behalf of eligible First Nations. The Indigenous governing body may submit more than one application per funding stream intake, provided that each eligible First Nation that is included as a sub-applicant is only funded once per intake. So a lot of content in that, one bullet. My recollection is that we haven't had any Indigenous governing bodies contact us so far to act as the primary applicant. We have had one regional district that has bylaws in place to act as the local regional emergency management organization. Those of you who keep an eye on legislation may realize that this provision that we've added to our program guide is a baby step, likely in moving towards what the new legislation identifies, and Brittany, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, multi-jurisdictional emergency management organizations, which will be further defined by regulation in the future, but are not yet. So we made this change recognizing that that further change is coming via legislation and regulation. Britt, do you want to add to that?
Nope, nailed it.
Nailed it.
Waiting for
Awesome. Thanks.
regulations.
Okay, question around C2C. So Lindsay, maybe we can let you to
Yeah.
answer this one. So does the regional C2C project need to be about climate emergencies, or can it be to further more general relationship building, i.e. working on under a compliant community plan?
Yeah, you nailed it there. Like I said, it's quite a broad program. And so certainly, strengthening relationships and fostering future cooperative action, supporting the reconciliation effort, UNDRIP and shared capacity building, reviewing of community plans. Those are all eligible under the funding stream. And if you have any questions around that, you can certainly direct them towards me and I can walk you through them. But it's a broad program, and the program guide does list a lot of examples of forms and agreements that you'd be eligible to complete.
Yes, I mean, C2C is sort of one of those interesting programs because the only eligibility factor that really exists in that program is it's at least one local government, at least one First Nation working together in the room together for dialogue, working on agreements together. What the topic is, what's of most interest or value to your communities is up to you. And it's really not honestly material to what you can apply for under the C2C program. Okay, I see there's a couple more questions here. We certainly have lots of time, so if folks have other questions, do feel free to add them. And it looks like we will move to ask a question live as well. So I'm going to do the last two questions I have in the chat, and then we can move to the live one. So for the three programs, is just one intake opportunity for 2025, or will there be fall into intake dates like with other programs? So with the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund over the last, I think, 2 fiscal years, we've had one intake of each of the 6 funding streams per fiscal year. So we typically do 3 intakes in the fall, 3 intakes in the winter/spring. Currently, we are at a position where we're not, honestly, we're not certain what the future is for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. We're going to be looking at the remaining funds and making some decisions about what the 2025-2026 fiscal year will look like in terms of grant opportunities. But right now, we only do have the intakes available for the balance of what would be the 2024-25 fiscal year, recognizing that the last one's in April, so a little bit outside of the fiscal year, but still within our last 3 intakes for CEPF for this year. So the short answer is stay tuned, and we'll be able to provide more information about future intakes, probably, February, March. Last question is about the Canada Community Building Fund. Oh, not the last question now. Specifically about the Strategic Priorities Fund. So we're not the program officers for the Canada Community Building Fund. So certainly encourage the person who added that question to follow up. Either you can email the CEPF address and we can forward it along, or the ccbf@ubcm.ca email address, and follow up with the program officers for the Canada Community Building Fund.
Danita, I will note that we did receive an email question. So
do you want to read that one out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a question that says there was something mentioned about the EOCs need to be local government buildings to receive the funding. Can you please clarify? Lindsay, do you want to take that? Would you like me to? I'm happy either way.
Go for it, Sasha.
All righty. So yes, that
I
is
have the
correct.
guide open in front of me if that's helpful.
I mean, for all of our in all of these streams, well, EOC and ESS, we have noted that they do have to be within First Nations or publicly owned, so local government owned buildings, or an asset owned by a primary applicant or a sub-applicant. And we'd be happy to, talk through that as well. If you have any other questions, you can certainly send me an email or Lindsay an email. Either one would be happy to help out with that.
Great, thanks.
We can go back to the Q.
Yeah, so I see 2 more questions are here. So back to C2C. For C2C, our local First Nations and municipality are planning prescribed burns for fuel mitigation and ecological restoration. Can the funding be used towards having an external contractor complete prescriptions for the project, or would that fall under FireSmart? That would fall under FireSmart. You're into the practice of forestry, and that would yeah, you need to apply under FireSmart. That said, general conversations, keeping the dialogue open between Indigenous and non-Indigenous neighbors. You're certainly welcome to hold forums, hold events that are focused on FireSmart, that are focused on fuel management between councils, between elected officials, between senior staff under the C2C funding. So the actual prescriptions, because we're talking about the practice of forestry, need to be vetted through the Ministry of Forests. But in terms of general events that are focused on FireSmart, absolutely look towards C2C to support those types of dialogue costs. Sorry, Lindsay, that was your question and I answered it.
You did a great job.
All right. One more question here, but certainly if you have more questions, pop them in or email us. So what I'm seeing here for the last question, oh, I think we just answered, but are there any CEPF funding streams that will be ending soon and no longer available in 2026 or beyond? The answer I just gave is we will have more information on future funding streams for CEPF probably February or March. Those of you who may have followed the disaster risk reduction climate adaptation funding stream may realize that we did have an intake scheduled for this winter that was canceled. And so unfortunately, the funding we had for that program is likely all to be expended under the intake that's currently being adjudicated. But we are committed to these 3 intakes that we have advertised. And then, like I said, stay tuned. February or March, hopefully we'll have some more information about what the future of the program looks like. In terms of our general timeline, we tend to have the program materials for the next fiscal year available by usually end of June, July 1st. So we will be working over the spring on the funding streams that will continue under CEPF. Oh, look at this, 3 more questions popped up. So my understanding was that the owned building part was only relevant for renovations, etc., and not for other activities. I'm looking for further clarification as most ESS reception centers are not in government-owned buildings.
Hmm.
So I don't have the ESS guide in front of me. Um, I just have, Sasha, do you want to speak to ESS?
Sure, no problem. So, um, I mean, just looking at the program guide here specifically that has the language in it, it says for the purpose of CEPF funding, if minor renovations of group lodging facilities or reception centers are proposed, the facilities must be located in a First Nation owned building or publicly owned building or an asset owned by the primary applicant or sub-applicant. So ESS reception centers, group lodging are a little bit different than EOCs. And so um, I don't think we've had this question before, honestly. I'm trying to remember if this has come up in the past. Anita, do you recall? I don't think personally I've been asked this question before.
No, I mean, I think generally speaking, it's a question of sort of who owns the improvement. So if it's a building that's
Yeah,
not owned by an applicant or a sub-applicant, is it potentially privately owned? Um, you know, because we are administering public dollars, we need to be, exercise due diligence in where those dollars are invested. Certainly under ESS, group lodging and reception centers, buying the equipment has never been a challenge. So you need,
yeah,
hygiene kits or cots or blankets or whatever it is, and the IT equipment. What we typically see is that it's, communities are using, mobile storage solutions so that things are sort of boxed up and then taken to the site when the reception center or the group lodging is opened. And so whether that's at your local Legion Hall or the Boy Scouts Hall or whatever it might be, those assets are still owned by the applicant, but they're rolled out or operationalized at whatever the facility might happen to be for group lodging or reception centers. We're just not going to pay, generally speaking, for, substantial renovations to buildings that aren't owned by eligible applicants. Okay. Next question. Our regional district is leasing a floor space from a commercial building for EOC space. Does this make us ineligible for EOC funding? Um, Probably not. I would really recommend that you connect with one of our program officers and we talk you through that. Um, yeah, again, there's lots of training, other aspects, like it's the ESS and EOC funding streams don't drive you towards sort of more renovations. So it's not always something about an improvement to a facility. So if it's the type of equipment that I spoke to that is sort of boxed up and brought out when you're activated, or if it's training you're looking at, tabletop exercises, those types of pieces, there's lots of options. So certainly reach out to our program officers. Love to hear more about your specific circumstances, and we can walk you through, provide some advice on that. All right, we're going back to Fire Smart funding. How long does so if for the 2025 Fire Smart funding, how long does the approval process usually take for allocation-based applications? So we're generally looking to get allocation-based applications once we receive a complete application from the applicant within 60 days. So sometimes applications unfortunately come in bits and pieces, or maybe they have errors or we require clarification. So once we have a complete, accurate application, we aim to get for allocation-based funding to have the response out within 60 days. For what it's worth, for application-based funding, it's 120 days. Okay, could emergency route planning funding be used to design emergency evacuation infrastructure? No, that's that's a very short answer. What you'll see in our program guide, I'm just trying to quickly, I had it open and then I closed it. You'll see listed under ineligible activities. So as Lindsay was speaking to the fact that it's always important to look at what's in the table, it's equally important to look at, things that we've specifically identified as ineligible. So what you'll see under ineligible is, let's have to
I think
find
the
it now.
major capital or infrastructure improvements.
There is that, but there's another one, right? Yeah, so major capital or infrastructure improvements, including road design and construction, or major renovations to existing facilities or constructions of new facilities are ineligible. So any aspect of design or construction of what would be evacuation infrastructure is not eligible. As Sasha said, this is purely a planning grant for both the purposes of public notification and evacuation route planning. Okay. Looks like we're back to the question of ownership. So training, etc., is all good to fund. It's only building improvements that need public ownership. I think your earlier statement made it sound like nothing was eligible unless within a public building. Um, Sorry if we created any confusion. If you have any questions about your specific building ownership, the assets you own, and how that relates to ESS and EOC, give us a call, send us an email. Very happy to walk you through specific circumstances. Just, again, want to point out UBCM is administering public dollars. There's rules around that. We are exercising our due diligence and ensuring that those funds are invested in facilities that are there for public benefit. So that was the last question. I'm just gonna, pause for 10 seconds, see if anybody wants to get in there with an additional question. Otherwise, we will wrap up early for the day. And certainly, as we've said, probably no less than 10 times now, feel free to email us, call us, reach out either to me, any of our program officers, or through our CEPF email account. And we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that we didn't cover today or that might be more specific to your community. So with
Nita,
that, oh,
I'll just
yeah.
add, Nita, that if there's anyone on the call that has a question regarding their community around like a hazard or a risk, and maybe you're not even sure what type of project you need or what type of funding program would be helpful for your community, feel free to reach out to me through that email address there, emcr.disastermitigation.gov.bc.ca, and we can talk through it.
You beat me to it, Britt. I was just going to say, if our panelists have any closing remarks or last thoughts, feel free.
Yeah.
So thanks to everyone who took the time to join us this afternoon. I know we kind of double booked with the conference that's going on, so that was unfortunate, but it looks like we still got close to 80 folks on this webinar. So we appreciate your time. And as we've said, we're always here for further questions or comments. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank you.